The weighted blanket was regulation size, 1 metre by 1.5 metres, filled with glass beads, and it weighed exactly 6 pounds. Mara Voss had carried it down the 4th-floor corridor of the Ashvale Paediatric Wellness Centre every Tuesday and Thursday morning for 7 months, and she knew its weight the way she knew her own breathing. She knew the way it shifted when she rounded the corner past the therapy suites. She knew the exact point at which the beads settled lowest, which was when she held it against her left hip with her forearm underneath. She did not know that Dorian Ashvale would be waiting for her in that corridor today, or that the expression on his face would be the one she had learned to identify in childhood as the expression that preceded something she could not walk away from intact. "You're 20 minutes late." He stepped into the centre of the hallway. The elevator was held on the 2nd floor. She kept moving, angling right to pass him. His arm came out. It caught her at the shoulder and drove her back into the wall. The blanket hit the floor. She had interned at this clinic for 8 months before they hired her full-time. She had completed 216 therapy sessions in this building. She had learned which lights buzzed at a frequency that distressed non-verbal children, and had written a maintenance request about it 4 months ago that no one had acted on. She knew where every camera was on this floor, and she knew that 3 of the 4 facing this corridor had been disconnected at some point in the past 6 weeks. Because she had noticed the red indicator lights go dark, and had noted it in a personal log she kept on her phone. She had not reported it. She had not known yet why it would matter. She knew now. "You went over my head." His voice was level. That was the part that made it worse. "You sent a clinical report to the Accord Placement Office without running it through my desk first. The report was required under the terms of the placement agreement." She kept her own voice even. "It was due Friday. I submitted it Friday. You included observations that were not yours to make. I am his therapist. They were entirely mine to make." His hand came back. She saw it, and she did not close her eyes. The therapy room at the end of the corridor was used for sensory integration work. It had 2 locks on the inside, a heavy door, and walls that had been padded 3 years ago for a patient who no longer came. Mara got through it, and through both locks before Dorian's shoulder hit the other side. The room smelled like the lavender diffuser she had left running on Thursday. The floor was covered in interlocking foam tiles, blue and green, that she had ordered with her own money when the requisition sat unprocessed for 4 months. She put her back against the door and tried to breathe. Her phone showed 2 bars. The clinic director was Dorian's uncle. The nursing station on this floor was staffed by a woman who had looked away from a bruise on Mara's wrist 3 months ago without speaking. The nearest police station in the Ashvale district had a sponsorship plaque in its lobby with the Ashvale family name on it. She had nowhere to call, except she opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she had saved 11 months ago with a notation beside it that she had never intended to use. The notation read, "He meant it." She pressed call before she could think through what she was doing. 11 months ago she had sat in a waiting room on the 42nd floor of a building on Crestfall Avenue, while a man who identified himself as Aldric reviewed the terms of an arrangement that no agency she had ever worked for had offered her before. The consultation had been conducted through a representative. Mara had not met him in that room. She had seen the office, which was spare and cold in the way that very expensive things are often spare and cold, and she had signed an initial disclosure form on a desk that she later learned cost more than her graduate degree. She had met him for the first time in the parking structure underneath the building, where she had been walking to her car and had dropped her bag and crouched to collect the contents, and where she had looked up to find a man crouching beside her, gathering her pens and her wallet and a small photograph that had slid under the front tyre of the car next to hers. He had not said anything about the bruise on her forearm, which was 3 days old and yellow at the edges. He had simply handed her the photograph and stood, and then said, with the particular precision of someone who does not offer things twice, "If you ever need to reach me directly, I mean that as a standing offer." He had given her a card with a number on it. She had taken it home and stared at it for an evening, and then put it in her phone under his first name, filed alongside that single line she would not let herself forget. His voice, when he answered, was not surprised. "Mara, I need help." She had not planned the words. "I'm at the Ashvale Clinic. 4th floor therapy room. He's locked me," she stopped. "It doesn't matter. I shouldn't have called. This isn't your... Stay on the phone." His voice was already moving in a different register. Not louder. Lower, Ashvale Pediatric. 4th floor. Yes, 20 minutes. The door took another impact. The second lock held. Okay, she pressed herself further into the corner behind the sensory equipment cabinet. Okay, 41 floors up and 6 blocks northeast. In a room where the lights had been set to a level that suited the assembled representatives of 4 bloodlines, rather than any human preference for visibility, Aldric set his phone down on the table with the screen facing up. He was wearing a dark suit, no tie. His hands, which had been folded on the table, opened. Councillor Fenrath of the Hessian line, who had been mid-sentence, stopped. The room was very quiet for a moment. "We will adjourn." Aldric's voice had not changed in volume or tone, which was the reason that every person in the room was already pushing back their chair. "My assistant will reschedule." He was at the elevator before anyone answered. His driver was a man named Theo, who had worked for him for 32 years, and who did not ask questions when Aldric came through the car park level at a pace that made the attendant step back against the wall. Theo simply started the engine. The Bentley Mulsanne came out of the underground structure and turned north onto Crestfall Avenue. Aldric put the phone to his ear. Still with me. It was not a question. She could hear him through the phone, and she could hear Dorian through the door, and she was managing the distance between those two sounds the same way she managed everything that was too large to look at directly, which was by breaking it into components and attending to the nearest one. The nearest one was the Heir. He was here today. Tuesday sessions. He had been brought up at 9 in the morning by one of the household staff, and he was in the adjoining room, which connected to the therapy suite through a soundproofed observation window. She could see him through the glass. He was sitting on the floor with his knees drawn up, rocking in a slow, careful arc that she recognized as a self-regulation pattern, not distress. He was okay. He was managing. She watched his hands. His hands were how she had learned to read him 7 months ago, when every other clinician in the building had written in his file that he was non-communicative and resistant, and probably not a good candidate for standard therapeutic approaches. She had watched his hands in the first session and seen something in the way he pressed his left index finger against his thumbnail in a repeating sequence, and she had matched the rhythm with her own hand against the edge of her chair, and he had looked at her for the first time in a way that was not defensive. She had not put that in the formal report. There were things that belonged to the two of them. He was looking at her now through the glass. His hands had gone still. She pressed her palm flat against the window. He pressed his against his side of it. 6 blocks, Aldric said in her ear. Dorian's shoulder hit the door again. Something in the frame cracked. She counted her breaths. The air counted with her. She could not hear him, but she could see his chest moving. 3 blocks. The door cracked further. One lock gave, the other held. She moved the sensory cabinet in front of the door using her whole body and every pound of weight she could put into it. The crescent, Aldric said, as though reading an address. The front steps. The door came off its upper hinge. She heard it before she understood what she was hearing. The sound from the corridor was not Dorian. It was below Dorian's register, below anything human, and it came with a concussive force that was not a knock or a strike, but something that redistributed air in the entire floor, and then there was no more sound from the corridor at all. Aldric came through the space where the door had been. He did not look at the room. He looked at her. She had seen people move through shock before, in clinical settings, in children who had experienced frightening things, and then gone very still and careful inside their own bodies. She had learned to recognize the particular quality of stillness in a person who was doing the hard work of not falling apart. She did not know what she looked like to him at that moment. She only knew that he crossed the room in 4 steps and crouched in front of her where she had come down to sit against the sensory cabinet, and that his hands did not touch her. They waited. The door frame behind him was not broken. It was gone. The wall around it had been redistributed in a way that she did not examine. In the corridor, Dorian Ashvale was sitting against the opposite wall, with his right hand held to his chest, and an expression that suggested he had revised his understanding of the situation. His uncle, the clinic director, had appeared from somewhere, and was now standing very still with his phone in his hand, and both arms pressed to his sides. Aldric turned his head. Just his head. The funding agreement your family has with the Accord Placement Office is administered through a trust registered to my name. I want that understood clearly. He did not look at the clinic director when he said it. He did not need to. The clinic director's phone returned to his pocket. The Ashvale family will not have contact with Mara Voss. Not through this clinic, not through any affiliate, not personally. If that position requires clarification, I will clarify it through your mortgage holder, because I am also that. A pause. We understand each other. He turned back to Mara. He went down on one knee. His voice dropped to a register that was entirely different from the one he had used for the corridor. It was the one she had heard once before, in a parking structure on Crestfall Avenue, when he had handed her a photograph and meant every word he said. Can you stand it? It was not quite a question. Yes, she took his offered hand and stood, and then the Heir's door opened, because the Heir had found the interior latch, and he came through it at the particular fast walk he used when something had been decided in him, and he walked past his father entirely, and pressed himself against Mara's side with both arms around her waist. He had never voluntarily initiated contact with another person in 7 months of documented sessions. Every member of Aldric's household staff who had accompanied him, and the attending physician who had come with the Heir that morning, and both personal guards who had appeared from somewhere in the stairwell, were standing in the ruined doorway. Nobody spoke. The Heir's face was against Mara's ribs. He was not distressed. He was the most settled she had ever seen him. Aldric looked at his son. Then he looked at Mara. Something in his expression did not have a name she knew. He rose and put his jacket around her shoulders without asking, because the room was cold and she was shaking, and then he spoke quietly to the staff in the doorway. Bring the car to the rear exit. She would not enter that building again for 11 months. He did not have a first aid kit in the Bentley. He had something better, which was a doctor who was waiting at the estate, but the drive was 40 minutes, and he did not want to wait. He found what he needed in the console's emergency compartment, and he cleaned the cut above her eyebrow himself. In the back seat, with the precision of someone who had been managing wounds since before her country existed. You don't have to apologize for calling me. He pressed a folded gauze pad to her brow and held it there, because she had opened her mouth twice. I told you it was a standing offer. You're in the middle of a tribunal. The tribunal will reconvene. The councillors are patient. They have no choice, because I own the building they meet in. She almost laughed. It came out unsteady. He was quiet for a moment, in a way that felt like consideration rather than avoidance. The report you submitted. The one Dorian objected to. Some of what you wrote about the way he responds to rhythm, to matched physical cues, No one has put that in a clinical document before. It's how he communicates. She watched the city move past the tinted window. I know people probably think I'm attributing more than is there. But he's been telling me things for 7 months. Just not in words. Aldric looked at her steadily. I know exactly what he's been telling you. She did not ask what he meant by that yet. She filed it. The estate sat behind a gate on a street in the Caldwell district that did not appear on the public mapping services. The gate was iron and old, and the grounds behind it were dark with trees that had been growing for longer than the street itself. She noticed without comment that the gate recognised the car before Theo's hand was anywhere near the intercom. She woke up on an upper floor she did not recognise. The medical suite where she had fallen asleep smelled like antiseptic and something older underneath it, like stone. This room smelled like linen and old wood, and it had a window that faced east, which meant the light that came through it was morning light, specific and golden, the kind of morning light that her apartment on Meridian Street, which faced a wall, had never once produced. Her apartment on Meridian Street had a refrigerator that ran warm on the left side, and a window latch that only locked from the outside, and a downstairs neighbour who played music at a level she had long since stopped hearing. She had lived there for 4 years. The bed she had slept in there was a queen-sized mattress on a platform frame that she had assembled by herself on a Saturday afternoon using an instruction diagram that was printed in a font size she needed to squint to read. The bed she was currently in was older than everything she had ever owned, and it knew it. There was a tray on the table beside the bed. Tea, which was still hot. Toast. A document in a blue folder that she recognised as a clinical summary, specifically the quarterly progress report for the Heir, which had her name on the author line, and which she had submitted through the Accord Placement Office on Friday. She opened the folder. Inside, beneath the summary, was a single handwritten note. The handwriting was formal and very old in style, even if the words were not. I thought you might want to see the version that reached me unedited. She read through it once. Then she sat with it in her lap and looked at the morning. He came to the door 20 minutes later with his own cup of tea, which she found unexpectedly ordinary, and asked if he could sit. She gestured to the chair by the window. He sat in it the way he did most things, with the ease of someone who had long ago stopped being conscious of how he occupied space. The Heir's name. She said it carefully. I know it from the files. But I've never heard anyone use it with him. He doesn't respond to it. Has he ever? A pause. Not since he was very young. Aldric looked at the window. His mother chose it. He knew her until he was 4 years old. She did not ask more about that. She understood the shape of a boundary. He responded to something, though. She set the folder down. On Thursday I was doing rhythm work with him, and I hummed a melody I don't even know where I know. He went completely still, and then he looked at me like I'd said his actual name. Aldric set his cup down. He was looking at her with an expression she was beginning to learn was not calculation, but something older and more careful. That melody is something his mother sang. His voice was slow and deliberate. It was private. It was not recorded anywhere. He stopped. Mara, no one outside his household has heard it. The room was quiet for a long moment. She was still holding the blue folder. I don't know how I knew it. I do. He rose and picked up his cup. We should talk about that. But not yet. Eat your breakfast first. The doctor would like to look at your eye this morning, and after that I'd like to show you where his therapy materials are kept, because I'd like you to continue his sessions here while we sort out the Ashvale situation. It was such a practical series of sentences. She found, unexpectedly, that she was grateful for that. The doors opened without a knock. That was the first thing wrong. The estate's entrance hall doors were 40-year-old oak, solid enough that Mara felt the movement of air from the second-floor landing where she was standing with the heir's weighted vest in her hands, and she registered that they had opened at a force and a speed that no ordinary visitor produced. The woman who came through them was approximately her own age, or appeared to be, which she had learned in 11 months of working adjacent to the Accord's world meant nothing at all. She wore a grey suit and heels on a stone floor, and she walked like someone who had never in her life moved to accommodate another person's comfort. Behind her were two men who did not have any of the softness of people employed in ordinary capacities. Aldric appeared from the study corridor with his jacket on, and his expression arranged into the particular neutrality she had come to understand was not calm, but its opposite. Seraphine. His voice was cordial and entirely without warmth. Lord Aldric. The woman's gaze went up to the landing. It found Mara and held there for 2 seconds with the focused absence of expression that meant she had already been briefed on exactly who Mara was. Then it returned to Aldric. The Accord has asked me to come in person. The Accord could have sent a letter. Letters are for situations the Accord considers manageable. Seraphine folded her hands in front of her, a gesture that was composed and deliberate. The Vale Syndicate's forfeiture notice was filed this morning. You're aware of it. I received it. Then you understand that the surrogacy contract you have registered with this woman is not valid under the Accord's framework. She was not vetted. She was not presented to the Bloodline Council. The prior arrangement with the Vale line held a pre-emptive claim on the surrogacy process for this heir, and your unilateral action has voided a financial agreement worth $400 million and a territorial compact that was 40 years in negotiation. Aldric said nothing. The Syndicate is not asking you to acknowledge wrongdoing. Seraphine's voice remained level and professional. They are invoking the forfeit clause. You have 48 hours to surrender the woman to Accord custody, at which point she will be processed according to the standard placement review, and the Vale arrangement will be reinstated. If you decline, the Syndicate will activate the dissolution protocol, which will trigger a review of every territorial alliance you currently hold. You will stand alone in the next council session, and you know what that costs. Aldric turned his head and looked at Mara on the landing. It was a brief look, and it contained an entire conversation, the short version of which was stay. The Vale Syndicate's prior arrangement was never finalised. It was a letter of intent. His voice was even and without heat, directed to Seraphine as though reading from a document he had already memorised. I reviewed the wording personally, and I want you to convey to Cassius Vial that I reviewed it personally, because he will know what that means. A letter of intent is not a binding claim under Article 7 of the Accord, regardless of what his legal team has told him. The monetary investment is a loss I will reimburse at 120%. Something in the air of the entrance hall had shifted. The two men behind Seraphine were very still. What I will not do is surrender anyone from this house to the Accord's custody on the basis of a filing that Cassius Vale knew was weak when he submitted it. He filed it because he expected me not to challenge it publicly. A pause. He was wrong. Seraphine looked at him for a moment. He will convene the council. He is welcome to. Tell him that I will be present, and that I will bring documentation, and that Councillor Fenrath of the Hessian line will be seated beside me, because Cassius Vale has owed the Hessian line a debt for 60 years, and has been avoiding that room for exactly that reason. Aldric opened the front door himself. You have my answer. The 48 hours are yours to use however you choose. Seraphine walked to the door. She paused at the threshold and looked up at Mara again. You should understand, not unkindly, that what he's done by keeping you here has positioned you as the centre of a conflict that has nothing to do with you personally. The Syndicate doesn't want you. It wants the alliance the surrogacy was meant to secure. In 48 hours, regardless of what he tells you now, you will be better off in Accord custody than at the centre of a bloodline war. She left. Aldric closed the door. Mara stood on the landing with the weighted vest in both hands and said nothing for a moment. How much of that is true? Most of the factual components. He looked up at her. None of the implications. She found the bag she had arrived with, which someone had cleaned and returned to the room she was using, and she began folding her things into it at 9:47 that evening. She was methodical. She was not panicking. She had made the calculation quietly during the dinner that Aldric's household staff had produced with the same competent efficiency with which they did everything, and she had sat through it with the Heir beside her because he had moved his chair against hers and she was not going to be the one to move it back. And she had eaten and had answered questions and had listened, and then she had come upstairs and begun packing. The thing that Seraphine had said that she could not argue with was simple. She was not from this world. She had signed a contract that she had understood as a medical and legal arrangement, not as a geopolitical event. She had not known, when she signed it, that it would cost Aldric every alliance he held. She had not known, when she accepted his help in the corridor of the Ashvale Clinic, that it would position her as the centre of something worth $400 million. She had not known. But she knew now. And she had spent her whole life being the variable that made other people's situations worse. The placement that disrupted the family. The hire that complicated the office. The contract that voided an alliance. She had always been the thing someone settled for until the arrangement they actually wanted became available again. She zipped the bag. She picked it up. The door was open. Aldric was standing in it. She did not know how long he had been there, but his expression said that he understood what the bag meant, and his position in the doorway said that he had thoughts about it. "I'm not asking permission to leave." She kept her voice even. "I'm telling you I'm going, because leaving without telling you would be the one genuinely rude thing I could do after everything you've done, and I'm not going to do that." "Where will you go?" "I'll figure that out." "You are the centre of a conflict." His voice was quiet, with no pressure in it at all. "Moving you to a different address does not remove you from it. It removes you from the only protection I can guarantee. You shouldn't have to guarantee anything for me." She met his eyes. "I'm not your responsibility. I was a contractor. The contract got complicated. That's not something you should have to fight a war over." She heard herself say it. She heard all of it. She had known this about herself for as long as she could remember, the specific calculation she ran when things became difficult, which was that whatever she was contributing was not worth what she was costing, and that the correct move was to reduce the cost. She had run it at 9 years old when the family who had chosen her had a baby, and she had run it at 26 when a job offer fell through because the budget tightened, and she had run it every time since. I am not worth a bloodline war. Her voice had gone quieter. I have never been anyone's first choice. I was always the option people settled for when the real one fell through. That's what I am. That's what I have always been. And I'm not going to pretend the math is different just because the stakes are bigger. She moved toward the door. He stepped back from it. Just one step. She stopped, because the step was unexpected. He sat down on the floor, in the doorway, with his back against one side of the frame, knees up, with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had all the time in the world and intended to use it. She stared at him. "I am going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it before you take another step. You can leave after. I will not stop you. But I am asking you to hear it first." She put the bag down, not because he had asked her to, because the floor in a doorway was not where people like him sat, and she wanted to understand why he was doing it. He was, she would think later, one of the oldest things alive. He had told her his age once in passing, the way someone might mention having been born in a particular city, entirely without self-pity. 432 years. He had outlived empires. He had watched languages die and been there when new ones were built in their place. He had sat with the grief of outliving everyone who had ever known him in any particular way, and had learned to carry that grief with the posture of someone who had decided the carrying was worth it. He had not knelt in a doorway in 432 years. She knew that without him saying so. You said you were never anyone's first choice. His voice was low and entirely level. I want to take that apart, because you said it as though it were a fact you had verified. And it is not. She was still holding the bag. Set that down. Not a command, a request. She set it down. My son has never voluntarily touched another person. Not since his mother. I have spent 3 years watching clinicians attempt to reach him with the tools they were trained to use, and he has declined every one of them, not because he is unreachable, but because he is particular. And particular is different from broken, and you were the only person in 7 months who understood that. He paused. He did not walk to me when I came through that door today. He walked to you. He did not walk to you because you were available. He walked to you because he had decided at some point in the previous 7 months that you were his. Not a possibility. Not a substitute. His, she did not speak. I noticed the bruise on your forearm 11 months ago in a parking structure on Crestfall Avenue. He said it plainly. I noticed it and I gave you a direct line to me, and I told you it was a standing offer because I had already made a decision, and the decision was not administrative. I did not offer you that contract because you were the only occupational therapist who applied. I offered it because you were the first person who had ever matched his rhythm back to him in an intake session, and because you picked up a photograph from a parking garage floor and did not ask me any of the questions that most people ask when they recognize me, and because the bruise on your arm made something in me that is usually very quiet go entirely still. She sat down on the edge of the bed. You are not a placeholder. He said it the way he said things he meant to remain. You are not a variable that complicates the arrangement. You are the arrangement. My son chose you before I had finished processing the contract, and he chose you the way creatures like him choose things, which is permanently and without revision. And the reason that melody is in you, the one his mother sang, is something I have not yet explained to you, but I will, because it is the part that makes the math you are so certain of come out differently than you think. He looked at her. I did not rescue you from the Ashvale clinic out of obligation. I drove 6 blocks at a speed that stripped paint from the barriers because you called, and because you are not replaceable, and because the idea of you behind a locked door with your back against a cabinet was something I was not willing to allow to continue for 1 more second longer than I could prevent it. A pause. That is not a man settling for an available option. That is a man telling you what you are. He was still on the floor. She was on the bed. The bag was between them on the carpet. I have believed that thing about myself since I was 9 years old. I know. It is very loud. I know that too. She looked at him for a long time, at the floor beside the doorway, at the extraordinary fact of him on it. I don't know how to stop believing it in one conversation. You don't have to. He rose slowly. You just have to stay long enough to let the evidence accumulate. She left the bag where it was. The room they used for the binding was not ceremonial. It was the study on the ground floor, which had a fire and 2 chairs and books on every wall that she had been slowly committing to memory since she arrived. The heir was asleep upstairs. The household was quiet. She had asked him, earlier, what the binding was and what it required. He had explained it with the same precision he brought to everything, which she appreciated. a mark, shared between them. A formal claim under the Accord's law that superseded any contractual arrangement because it was not contractual. It was biological and permanent, and could not be voided by a forfeiture notice or a syndicate filing. It would grant her something from him that was not metaphorical, which was the heir's protective instinct fully and specifically extended to her voice. If she called the heir's name at any volume, from any distance within the estate or within his established range, he would come to her. Not a learned behaviour, a reflex, like breathing, permanent, and the step I have to initiate. What is it? He showed her. She looked at it for a moment. She initiated it. The mark was on the inside of her left wrist. It was warm for a few minutes after, and then it became part of her the way everything important becomes part of you, which is quietly and without announcement. He sat back in the chair across from her. She sat in hers. The fire worked. Outside the study windows, the Caldwell district was dark and still, and the trees on the grounds moved in a wind she could not hear through the old glass. "Tell me about the melody," he told her. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "That's going to take me a while to understand." "Yes, but you're going to give me time to understand it. All of it." He said it simply. "As much as you want." She looked at the fire. She thought about the heir upstairs, asleep, with his weighted blanket that she had ordered with her own money, and that had been transported from the Asheville clinic along with the rest of his therapy materials by 2 members of the household staff who had gone back for it that afternoon without being asked. She was still herself. That was the thing she had been afraid of losing, and had not. She was still entirely herself. She heard them at 3 a.m. Not voices. Impacts, the kind that moved through the bones of a building rather than through the air, that she felt in the chair she had fallen asleep in when she had meant only to rest for an hour. The heir's voice came through the monitor on the desk. He was awake, but not crying. A particular sound she recognized as his alert state, watchful, processing. She was on the stairs before she had made a decision. She heard Aldric's voice from somewhere below, on the estate's ground level, and then she heard something else underneath it that was not a voice. She took the stairs to the upper floor instead of down. She went to the heir's room. He was sitting up in the bed with his knees to his chest. She crossed to him and put her hand flat on the space between his shoulder blades, the pressure point that he had identified himself in their 3rd session as the one that helped most. She felt him settle. Below them the sound continued. She could not see what was happening. She could hear it in segments, a concussion of force near the east wing. Aldric's voice once, giving a direction that was not addressed to her. Silence, and then a harder impact from the entrance hall, and then what sounded like a door failing its frame in a single movement. The air pressed against her side. She kept her hand on his back. The monitor on the desk crackled. Static, and then Aldric's voice through it. 3rd floor. Stay there. She stayed. She listened to the shape of what was happening below the way she had learned to listen to the air, by the quality of the silences as much as the sounds. Long silence meant control. Short, interrupted silence meant things in motion. The pattern below her was moving toward a longer silence, which she tracked the way she tracked a session nearing its natural close. The air put his face against her shoulder. She held still for him. Then the window on the north side of the room came open. She had not heard it being forced. That was the thing she registered first. No sound of the latch, no creak of the old frame. It simply opened, from the outside, which was not a thing windows on the 3rd floor opened from. The man who came through it was not large, which she also noted, because she had been expecting large. He was compact and deliberate, and he was already looking at her when he cleared the sill, which told her everything about where he had been positioned and for how long. Come with me, a professional instruction. Not unkind. The child stays. The heir's hand found her wrist. She looked at the man. She looked at his feet and his hands and the angle of his shoulders and the weight distribution that a person who has been crouching outside a window for an extended period carries when they first stand. She had spent 7 months learning to read bodies that communicated without words. She read his. He was going to move left and reach for her arm in approximately 1.5 seconds. On the bedside table was the heir's overnight feeding bottle, which was glass, and which she had filled and left there at 9 o'clock, because the heir still had it most nights, and she had made it a habit. She picked it up. He moved left. She was already in the position she needed to be. The bottle caught him at the temple in a controlled, precise arc that she had not planned consciously and did not think about. She had simply read where he was going to be and been there first, which was what she did. It was what she had always done. She read bodies, and she met them where they were going. He went down. The heir had not moved. She set the broken neck of the bottle on the table. She put her arm back around the heir. It's okay. Not for him, exactly, for both of them. Aldric came through the door 40 seconds later. He stopped. She was sitting on the heir's bed. The heir was asleep again, or near to it, with his face against her arm. The man from the window was on the floor, not permanently injured, but not going anywhere on his own. Aldric looked at the floor, at the bottle, at her. She met his eyes. Seraphine is downstairs. A pause. Would you be willing to come down? She settled the heir against his pillow. She pulled the weighted blanket up. She checked his breathing, which was deep and even, and she touched the pressure point between his shoulder blades one more time. Then she went downstairs. The entrance hall had been a different shape an hour ago. The damage was specific and not random, which told her something about how Aldric fought, which was that he did not waste anything. He was standing near the foot of the stairs, and she came to stand beside him. Seraphine was near the door. With her were 2 men who were the only people from the vile contingent still standing. Both were positioned with the particular stillness of people who have recently updated their assessment of a situation and are not yet sure what the new assessment implies. Seraphine was looking at Mara. Her expression had changed from the professional composure of the afternoon into something more complicated. The man upstairs. Seraphine's voice was careful. He had 40 years of field work. Mara did not respond to that. She is under formal claim. Aldric directed it at Seraphine with the weight of something final. The binding was completed last night. That supersedes the veil letter of intent under every version of the Accord's law going back to the original charter, and Cassius knows it, which is why he sent people tonight rather than waiting for a council session where I would have destroyed his filing with documentation. You came here in good faith this afternoon. I don't hold what happened tonight against you personally, but you will go back to Cassius, and you will tell him that the woman he sent people to collect has a formal claim on this house, on this heir, and on every protection this bloodline provides, and that the next contact between the Vale Syndicate and this estate will be conducted through the Accord's arbitration body, in a room with a full council present, where I will be very happy to discuss his methods of the past 12 hours. Seraphine's attention moved between them. The 2 surviving men were already moving toward the door. Seraphine looked at Mara for one long moment. What you did upstairs. She stopped. Something in her expression was not quite the professional composure from before, something that, in another context, Mara might have called reluctant acknowledgement. Cassius will know. That will be in my report. She left. The estate was quiet. The 4 bloodline captains who had come at Aldric's request, and who had been positioned in the estate's outbuildings during the breach, and who had observed the entry of the Vale enforcers and their exit, came in from the east corridor and stood without speaking. Aldric looked at them. It's done. They acknowledged it without ceremony, which she understood was how things were acknowledged in this world when they were simply true. The fire in the study was low by the time the house had resettled. She had gone back upstairs to check the air twice. The second time he had opened one eye and made the particular sound she associated with mild impatience, which meant he was fine and she was hovering, and he knew the difference. She went back to the study. Aldric was sitting in the chair she usually used. She took the other one, which was his, which she had never sat in before, and it was slightly too large for her in the way that things built for other people's proportions are slightly too large, and she found she did not mind. I'm going to tell you something. He was looking at the fire. His hands were in his lap. There was a cut on his left forearm that had mostly healed while she watched, which still startled her, the speed of it. I am not always what I was tonight. I want you to know that, because you have now watched me be it. And I would rather you know that I am aware of the distance between the two versions than assume you'll simply accept both without question. She thought about this. In my 3rd year of working with children, I had a patient who was terrified of elevators. Not mildly, completely. His parents had tried everything available. Other clinicians had tried everything available. She looked at the fire. I spent 4 sessions on the floor of a hallway next to an elevator that wasn't moving. We didn't go in, we just sat near it. And on the 5th session, he went in with me, and we went 1 floor, and he was okay. She paused. The point is that the thing that helped him was not the absence of the scary thing. It was someone who didn't flinch sitting near it with him. Aldric was very still. I watched you in that hallway today, and I knew you were dangerous. I also already knew that. You told me, in that parking structure, when you gave me your number and said it was a standing offer. A man who is not dangerous does not say it the way you said it. She met his eyes. I didn't call you because I didn't know what you were. I called you because I did. He looked at her for a long time. When I found you in that corridor with a weighted blanket, and you looked at him and read what he needed before anyone had said a word. He stopped there and let the sentence rest unfinished, which was its own kind of sentence. She waited. I had been watching clinicians try to reach him for 3 years. I had watched 47 different people sit across from him and attempt with genuine care and genuine skill to find the door. And then you found the door in 11 minutes. And I thought, watching you, that the most remarkable thing about you was not the clinical skill, though that is considerable. It was that you were not impressed with yourself for finding it. You simply found it and met him there. She looked at the fire. You said, tonight in the hall, that I was not replaceable. I want you to know that I heard that I'm trying to believe it. I know. I'm going to keep running the old calculation for a while. I know that too. She looked at her left wrist. The mark was there, warm and quiet, like a hand held. The melody, the one I somehow knew, the one his mother sang. Yes, you said it means something, about why I know it. It means he was looking for you before I was, before either of us understood what that meant. He was quiet for a moment. The heir's instinct is ancient, and it runs ahead of the rest of him, and it chooses you in the way that instinct chooses things, which is without needing a reason it can explain. The melody was in you because he had already decided. The contract was paperwork. The deciding had already been done. She sat with that. The fire settled. I have a question. Yes, the blanket. The weighted one. The one I dropped in the corridor when Dorian stopped me. Did someone actually go back to the clinic for it? 2 members of the household staff, with his monogram on the tag, because I embroidered it on so it wouldn't get mixed in with the clinic's general stock. Yes, she exhaled. All right. She stood up. She was still herself. Completely and without revision, she was still the person who embroidered monograms on therapy blankets and made notes in personal logs about security cameras and sat on floors next to elevators for 4 sessions before going in. I'm going to go check on him one more time and then I'm going to sleep, because I have been awake for approximately 22 hours and I do not function well without sleep. That is a documented limitation. He stood too. Tomorrow, I want to go over the Accord's arbitration process, because if Cassius Viel is going to a council session, I want to understand what that means, and I want to be useful in whatever preparation is required. You will be. Good. She moved to the door. She stopped. She turned back. When you said, in that parking structure, that you meant it as a standing offer, he was watching her. I believed you. That's why I kept the number. I believed you because you said it the way people say things they have already decided, not the way people say things they're still deciding. And I have been very good for a very long time at knowing the difference, even when I wasn't letting myself act on it. She left the door open. He stood in the study with the low fire behind him and the open door in front of him. She had not closed it behind her. The last time he had stood in a room with an open door that meant what this one meant was not a span of time he could reduce to a number, because it was longer than the numbers he usually used. He stood there for a while. He found he did not mind standing there. In the morning she woke before the air did, which was new. The light was the same gold through the east window. She made tea herself, in the kitchen, which she had learnt the geography of during the previous afternoon, and she stood at the long counter and drank it with both hands around the mug. The household cook came in at 6:30 and found her there and did not appear surprised. He's particular about the tea, the Darjeeling, not the Assam. The cook set her basket on the counter without ceremony. Noted, she refilled her mug. What does he usually eat for breakfast? The cook told her. She wrote it on a notepad she found on the counter and put it in her pocket, because she was a person who wrote things down, and old habits are the ones that survive extraordinary circumstances intact, and she had learned long ago that the self you are in a crisis is the same self you are everywhere else, the competent parts and the frightened parts and the parts that embroider monograms on blankets so things don't get lost. She was all of those parts. In a house that had been, as of last night, hers, she drank her tea. She made a list. If you stayed until the end, you already know what this story was really about. It was about a woman who had been told, in 1,000 different ways, that she was the backup. It was about a child who knew better. And it was about a man who had been alive long enough to recognize something true when it walked down a corridor carrying a weighted blanket. Like this video if Mara earned it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the backup plan is sometimes the whole plan. Subscribe to Dark Romance Chronicles and hit the bell so you never miss a story.